Now, the case of Hazlewood versus Kuhlmeir is interesting because it involves schools and a school newspaper. And, just to kind of reiterate where the reading took you to. It was a school newspaper being published towards the end of the year, and there were two articles that the principal was concerned about. And one dealt with teenage pregnancy. And he was worried that when a couple pregnant girls from the school were interviewed, that though their names didn't appear, it would be easy from other details in the article to know who they were. And so he was concerned about that being revealed, the idea that they weren't truly anonymous. In the second article, which dealt with divorce, a girl was quoted where she basically talked negatively about her father and said he hung out with the guys and wasn't around with his family. And the principal had no problem with that comment in itself, but the fact that the father was not given the opportunity to respond bothered him, and he felt both of these were problem areas. Now, normally he could have just had the students censor the articles. In other words, the students could have corrected these things themselves, but because doing so would have possibly caused the newspaper to miss its publishing deadline, which would lead to nobody seeing any of the newspaper, he made what you would call an executive decision and told the supervisor of the school newspaper to delete the 2 pages in which those articles were found. And unfortunately, that also led to the deletion of some other inoffensive articles that were on those same pages. But again, because of the deadline, they didn't have time to reset the entire newspaper. And so the editors of the school newspaper sued, claiming that freedom of the press and freedom of speech were being violated. And so in the first court, the school was found to be in the right. That decision was appealed by the students, and they were found to be in the right, that their rights had been violated, and that's where the case stood when it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The issue in front of the court, therefore, was, do school newspapers enjoy the same absolute freedom of the press as mainstream newspapers? And so the court took a look at this, and they said basically no. And not only that, they expanded upon the issue itself and set the precedent that schools are able to censor not only a school newspaper, but any school publication. So that could include things like the yearbook or a literary magazine or any other published material in the school, and also school performances. So that could include like a high school play or musical. It could include a school news broadcast or a senior video or basically anything else you can think of. So schools are allowed to censor those things if they can show the censorship is reasonably related to legitimate educational concerns. And so the principal in this case was kind of justified by the fact that the students who were pregnant and interviewed for that story could have faced harassment if they were known. The educational concern in the divorce article really probably rested more on journalistic guidelines, in which a person shouldn't be commented on without the chance to respond, and so that was used to justify that in this specific case. But the Hazlewood versus Kuhlmeir precedent really gives schools some leeway in censoring school publications and performances, and shows that there is not true freedom of the press and really even freedom of speech in certain situations in schools. Now, the next case you're going to look at, again, involves the New York Times and an incident known as the Pentagon Papers case. And so the first thing I'm going to have you do is kind of take a look at what the Pentagon Papers are before moving on to read about the actual New York Times versus United States case and what happened there, which kind of cleared up if and when the government can censor the mainstream press. But before you get to that case, you're actually going to work through a little activity where you take a look based on the case we just looked at, Hazlewood versus Kuhlmeir, and judge, would the school be right in censoring these school publications or performances in these specific situations? And again, make sure you check out the feedback because it gives you an idea of why they can or cannot. And so basically, to summarize it, you're going to finish this little activity and then move on to the final case in our Freedom of the Press lesson, New York Times versus the United States.